Welcome to the Every Brain is Different podcast. It is Samantha here with you. And today we have Dr. Gilly Khan on the show. She has been on here before, and she was the keynote for our 2024, I think, summit. And so I'm so excited to have her back. She wrote a book in September that came out last year that was called Allow Me to Interrupt. It's all about ADHD in women. And I'm so excited to have you on the show. Can you tell us a little bit more about you or what you want us to know about you?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Dr. Gilly Khan, and I'm a psychologist, a mom, and a writer. I just published my first book. Here it is. I have it here with me. And it's about emotional dysregulation and rejection sensitivity dysphoria in females with ADHD. And I'm really happy to be back here. I actually forgot about the summit. So yeah, I know
Yeah.
I felt like we've done a lot of stuff together. And so I guess now I know why. That makes sense.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, so outside of writing my book, I also write for magazines, including Psychology Today. I've been published in Attitude and other magazines, and I mostly write about ADHD.
Yes. I love reading your work. I think you have such a great perspective on it because of the work that you've done and your personal experience. And in your book, I really appreciated that you brought together the research that's been done, called out the research that hasn't been done, and brought your own personal experience to it and all of that. I love when people don't just write about their own personal experience. I think that's great. But then they also bring in the research to show this is what research is showing. You talked about the brain between a female and a male, literally being different. And so I just think that's so fascinating. But I'm a nerd, so yeah, that's how that is. But today I would love to talk to you about what you would tell parents whose daughter just got diagnosed with ADHD, or they think their daughter has ADHD, or they just, what to look for and how to help them once they get diagnosed.
Yeah, so I think it would depend on the family on whether they already have the diagnosis or they're thinking about getting diagnosed. So if they already have the diagnosis, as a psychologist who provides individual therapy, I would probably want to gain a better understanding of, what are some things I could be helpful with. But then also I would definitely ask them about whether they've consulted with a psychiatrist, like who gave the diagnosis, if they already participated in psychological testing, and then what their needs and their questions are, because it really depends person by person. For one child, it may be beneficial to go through psychological testing if the psychiatrist was someone who was diagnosing the ADHD. But for another child, it may not be necessary. And it may not be something that the parents are interested in. For some families, there's great interest in medication, and other families, it's the opposite. They don't really want their child on medication. So it just depends on, the family's comfort level. Was the diagnosis surprising to them? Was this something they expected? If it was surprising, what was surprising about it? And then I could educate them a little bit about ADHD. And if it was surprising, it could have been because it was in their daughter. But yeah, I think it would depend. If let's say they didn't come in with an existing diagnosis and they had questions about it, then I would explain to them. A lot of people don't understand, how do you get diagnosed with ADHD? Is it like you go to a therapist and the therapist says you have ADHD? It shouldn't work like that. And because I'm not doing testing right now, I did do testing previously in my career, but I don't anymore. I'll tell them that it's really important that we get a second opinion. I can't just slap on an ADHD diagnosis just by looking at them, but based on their history and what I observe in therapy, if they show up late a lot, if they rarely complete their homework, if, the way that they talk, I observe them, if they're fidgeting a lot, you develop a radar over time. So, and, I might give them a screener for ADHD, but not do full out psychological testing. And then I would bring it up with them and ask them, what do you want to do about it? Are you okay with just this, or is this something you'd want to talk to a psychiatrist about? Would you like to go get tested? It's case by case.
Absolutely. So if someone is on the fence about getting a diagnosis, and you'll probably say this is case by case, but
Sorry.
no, that's totally fine. I appreciate that because I don't want people to listen to this and say, well, this person said to do this, and so this is the right answer for our family. That totally makes sense. What do you tell families who are on the fence about getting a diagnosis because they don't want their child labeled, or they're afraid their child will take that diagnosis and be like, well, I have ADHD, so I can't do this. It's not possible. What would you tell them?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an interesting question. I found, especially like recently, that at least in the United States, don't get that vibe at all from families. It's more about autism, where from what I've learned, it really depends on where you live. Like in some countries or maybe even states, I don't know, there's more resistance to an ADHD diagnosis, and some there's more resistance to autism. Potato, potato, in my mind, is just like it's a descriptor. It's a better way to understand your child and what their needs are. But unfortunately, there exists stigma. But I found that for ADHD, at least where I live, it's less so. So I almost never need to talk to parents about, is it okay if I talk to your child about this when it involves ADHD? But I do have to have that conversation when it comes to autism, unfortunately. And so the whole thing with the label, if they are concerned about having that label, I think it's more so not about having it on paper or having a professional say it, but about having their child be open about it. Like maybe they're resistant to their child openly saying, I take pills, or telling their friends they have ADHD. And so in that case, it's like you said, it depends on the family. If I go into a session and I tell them no, they should be comfortable and they should be telling everyone, then that's not going to be appropriate, because people have different belief systems, different upbringings, and it just depends. I need to meet them where they're at. And I think the best way to do that is just to talk realistically about the pros and cons and about the current culture. Like now you walk into a grocery store and there's like a million magazines about ADHD. Teenagers especially are just, they talk about it like it's normal. So it's not as quote unquote like big of a deal in terms of social repercussions as it was in the past. But I also want to respect people's upbringing, and I can't jump the gun and put them or impose like a very black and white, opinion on them.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that I've seen some families where, ADHD is not a real thing and it's just an excuse. And then other families were like, oh, you have ADHD, like, let's get you the supports you need. And just different things like that. So it's definitely a case by case thing and how the families are reacting to that and upbringing. So I think that's really important that you brought that up. One thing that surprised me, I think, and surprises a lot of people, is the difference between ADHD, how it's seen in boys and how it's seen in girls. And I never realized until I was like in my 30s that there was a thing called rejection sensitivity dysphoria, or that emotional dysregulation is a thing in ADHD. And I feel like it's seen more in girls, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's more of a way to detect ADHD in girls than it really shows up in boys. Like boys are really like hyperactive and stuff, and girls are more hyperactive in their brain. Can you talk a little bit more about the difference between the two and how you might detect it in your girl that's having a hard time if you're a parent?
Yeah, yeah. So now there's a lot of research on emotional dysregulation and ADHD. And currently, it's not part of the diagnostic criteria in the DSM-5-TR, which is the manual that is used most countries to diagnose mental disorders. But Dr. Russell Barkley has some really, really interesting videos on YouTube about the history of emotional dysregulation in ADHD, and it has been written about since the late 1700s, definitely the early 1900s. So it was like thought that it was only written about like in 1902. George Still was a physician who wrote about emotional dysregulation in attention disorders, but there's also some indication that there were physicians even earlier than that who were writing about it. There was research being conducted about it in the 1960s, but it has never made its way into the DSM. And so because of that, a lot of people are confused when, let's say they struggle with very big emotions or with saying something in anger or reacting by crying easily or being seen as too sensitive. Societally, we internalize that or label that as someone who has like a personality flaw, but it could just be ADHD or a part of ADHD. And so Dr. Russell Barkley has been advocating for emotional dysregulation to be added to the ADHD criteria, but it's still not there yet. And the research also shows that it's very clearly tied to ADHD. I mean, when you think about it, like even if you think about like the positive end of emotions, when I know this has happened to me, think about the kid in class who's very excited and like raising his hand like this and like overdoing it. It's not just impulsivity. There's motivation, there's excitement. Excitement is an emotion. Like, how do you tease that out? Even with procrastination, like, why are you procrastinating? Because of low motivation, maybe low mood. It's really hard to consider one thing like impulsivity without the other, the emotion. And then there's rejection sensitivity dysphoria, which is less researched. There are some more recent studies that have come out that are mostly qualitative, meaning they're more like open-ended. Scientists will go and they'll ask adults about their experiences with ADHD, and then many of them will describe being very sensitive to rejection, and they describe what Dr. William Dodson, he's the psychiatrist who popularized the term rejection sensitivity dysphoria, also known as RSD. And so they describe a lot of the symptoms that he has talked about in his lectures. There's also a questionnaire on the Attitude magazine website that has not been empirically validated. But when I say, some of the symptoms of RSD or the characteristics, that's really what I'm referring to, what he has described in that checklist.
Yeah, awesome. And then I was just thinking about when I was a kid, and well, still as an adult, I'm still called too much. I'm too emotional, too dramatic, too whatever. How do we help our kids who are labeled that and told they are too much? So when I was like in elementary school, I didn't care really. I talked, I was happy, I was laughing, like all that kind of stuff. And then I just showed my emotions. And then as I got older, I realized that people didn't seem to like that. And they called me too much. Like, you talk too much, you interrupt too much. But sometimes when I interrupt, like, I literally feel like I'm going to explode if I don't get what I want to say out. And so, how do we help our kids accept who they are? And I guess that's like empowering them to be who they are without apologizing for being too much.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, how do you think we can help our kids do that and just stay true to themselves without masking, I guess?
Right. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So I was just writing an article on creative writing and ADHD. And while writing it, I was explaining that, there are two sides to this coin, right? On the one hand, we are creative when it comes to divergent creativities. There's different types of creativity that are studied in research. Like once you start doing research, you notice it's very nitpicky, and it has to be because you need to understand what a term means or what does it mean specifically. And so researchers have kind of narrowed down creativity into two types, convergent and divergent. And divergent creativity is more kind of like free flowing, free thinking, like no parameters, where let's say someone asks you, like, what can you do with a brick, a rope, and a ball? All the different things you can invent with that. People with ADHD would come up with many more ideas if they have a high IQ. You need to have some like intelligence matters there, or, if you're a college student or something like that, than people without ADHD. But when it comes to convergent creativity, where more parameters are set and it demands more of your executive functioning, then they're less adept at that, which makes sense because people with ADHD have delayed executive functioning skills. So an example of like a convergent creativity task would be like a multiple choice question, or if you're given the same assignment, like, okay, you're given these three objects, how many things can you come up with? But it can't be X, Y, and Z, and you must be able to use it for this, and you have 5 minutes to complete it. Like, that's our worst nightmare.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that's one side to the coin, right? Like we're very like free flowing, parts of the brain that are involved in mind wandering and creativity, like those are things that, are overactive for us, which is why we're so easily distracted. So that's great, if you want to write stories. But on the other hand, like in order to write something like this, like I can't just be like blah, 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 blah. Like there needs to be a plan.
Yeah.
You need some structure. And so you need to find workarounds, or like, how can I purposefully inject some of these, strategies that are inherent into like convergent creativity, so that way I can produce something, a book, something coherent, because you can have a million different ideas, but then the question is, are you going to do anything about it? Or are we just going to sit here and brainstorm? So yeah, so I guess what I wanted to say was that, like fictional characters, right? Like people in real life, like we're flawed, especially people with ADHD. Like it's still a disorder. There are flaws involved in it. But there are also inherent strengths and really cool things about having ADHD. And so it's a matter, I think, of recognizing like what's hard for me, but what do I want to do about it?
Mhm.
You can sulk and feel badly and pity yourself, or, we can try to make this work. Highlight what you're really good at and then turn that into something. So that's a very long way to answer your question, I guess. If someone
Yeah.
was unsure of like, how do I balance the hard parts of ADHD and the strengths, it's using accommodations to bolster or to help yourself, in these circumstances that are harder for you, while also building on what you're already really good at.
Love it. Yes. Accommodations. And I just love everything about that answer. So thank you. I read in your book about comorbid diagnoses. So things that happen a lot with that are diagnosed along with ADHD. Can you just tell us some of those things that tend to be higher, like that happen more frequently when you're diagnosed with ADHD, like other things that are also diagnosed? Because I am diagnosed with a lot of them, and I did not know that it's comorbid with ADHD. And so, yeah, just let us know like what can parents look for, or like you mentioned migraines. If their kid is having migraines, they can know that that's, kind of part of ADHD, or anyway, you know what I'm saying.
So basically, if you have ADHD, then you're significantly more likely to be diagnosed with another disorder. It's very rare to find someone with just ADHD flying solo. And so I think that's where you were going with
Yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah,
They're
yes.
asked, like, what are the diagnoses that tend to go hand in hand? And because my book focuses on females, I write a lot about the role of estrogen, because now there's more research focusing on hormones and how those influence ADHD symptoms. Women are complicated, and that's sadly a reason that we haven't been included in research as much as males, even down to animal studies, because women are viewed as like uncontrolled because our bodies are in constant flux. Once we, hit puberty, then our hormones are up and down. And then even throughout different phases of life, if we get pregnant, there is a change. Once we go through perimenopause and menopause, there's a change. And then you add on other factors like hormonal conditions like PCOS. And in that case, it's completely unpredictable. But basically, there's this association between estrogen and dopamine. And when estrogen levels decrease, dopamine also decreases. And everyone knows dopamine is like the main neurotransmitter involved in ADHD, and we already have lower levels of dopamine. So if we're at a certain point in our cycle or in perimenopause, then estrogen levels tend to decrease. And then if we have ADHD, it's magnified. So this is why a lot of older women, besides the fact that the criteria are just insufficient right now to fully describe, accurately describe as many women as we can with ADHD. There's also the fact that now more information is coming out about estrogen and ADHD. And so if you're in perimenopause, then that's a really big hit. And then you start to look back on your life and you think, yeah, these things were hard for me, but they were okay. I mean, they were really, really hard, but I figured out some kind of a system. But then you hit perimenopause and all of that goes to shit. And so then they come in to, professionals and they seek out a diagnosis of ADHD. So because there's this link between estrogen and dopamine, there's also some research on, and Sarah Chayette has spoken about this on the ADHD Experts podcast, and I really like that episode. It's very interesting. But she talks about the connection between migraine and ADHD, and I say migraine and not like headaches or migraine headaches, because migraine deserves to be recognized as a condition within itself. Because if you suffer from migraine, it's not just a headache. It's extremely debilitating, and there's so many other symptoms. I mean, I also have a history, and I read about this in the book. I also have a history of migraine, and before I found the right treatment for it, which was only recently because this medication that I started taking is relatively new, I used to just get up and go throw up like it was nothing while having a migraine and just live my life, because it wasn't an acceptable, like it's not viewed as an illness. And so you're expected to go to work, and that's a problem. Like I used to work a lot with kids, and I felt like I can't do today, and I had to go anyway. And it's a risk in a sense.
Yeah.
If you're vomiting in the bathroom and a kid needs you, but it wouldn't be viewed as an acceptable excuse, which angers me. But I think, the association between ADHD and migraine is very, very interesting, because in migraine, just like with ADHD, when migraine is associated with lower dopamine, and migraine attacks are often triggered at certain periods of your cycle, like before your period. And that's because estrogen drops, and so dopamine drops. And so Sarah Chayette talks about how for some people who suffer from migraine, they take stimulant medications and it actually helps their migraine attacks. And it makes sense because it's increasing dopamine levels in the brain.
Yeah. That is fascinating. I loved your whole book, but that part of it, I was like, oh my gosh, my life makes sense. Because people told me that I was alphabet chasing, like I just wanted all these things and I just wanted to be diagnosed with all these things because I have quite a few diagnoses. I'm like, no, like I legitimately, like with migraine, I I can't see. Like my vision is so blurry when I have a migraine. And so I went and got medication for it. And luckily, after a while, like the medication worked and I don't have as many now. But like you said, it can be debilitating. And unless you've had migraine, then people do not understand. They do not understand that it's so debilitating. And then these other things are like, you're just chasing like the diagnosis. I'm like, I really would not like to be diagnosed with these things. I would love to just not
Right.
have these symptoms. But yeah, but we have come to our time. I could talk to you about this all day. But the last couple things I wanted to ask was, where can people find your book? And where can they find you online if they wanted to connect with you about the book or just anything?
Yeah, so you will definitely find my book on Amazon. They usually have very good stock. And then you can learn more about me by visiting my website, which is drgillykhan.com. I'm also pretty active on Instagram. And yeah, it was great talking to you, Sam. So thank you so much for inviting me back on your show.
Yeah, for sure. And if you're listening to this, go get her book. It is amazing and talks so much about ADHD and helps you understand it more. So definitely go get it. And thank you so much.